Welcome to the Northwest Local School Board meeting. Chris, would you like to take a roll call, please?
Mr. Gilbert,
Here.
Mr. Detzel,
Here.
Mr. Teetsort,
Here.
Mrs. Detzel,
Might be muted.
Pam, you're on mute.
Here.
Mr. Yoshimura,
Here.
Great, thank you. Will you please stand with me and while we do the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
With liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Are there any legislative updates?
So the only thing I have to report is last week, the state Senate unanimously passed Senate Bill 248, which extends the moratorium on the building code for school storm shelters. Basically, without the moratorium, schools or new construction would be required to build buildings to withstand 200-mile-per-hour winds. So that was unanimously passed by the Senate, and now it goes on to the House. That's all I have to report.
Okay, great. Todd, is there anything about that you've heard or anything?
No, it's been something they've been working on for quite a long time. If you're just passing a bond issue to build new schools, it is a huge additional cost to school districts of about $1 million. So this is a great thing to happen, as it will help schools be able to build schools in a more affordable fashion.
Good, okay, great. All right, next agenda item is report from any employee organizations. Did we skip over one? Oh, it skipped the Butler Tech, sorry about that. Jim, do you have any Butler Tech?
Just the only thing is that Butler Tech back up, gearing up for their adult ed starting in the fall. And then they're just kind of waiting to see what the governor says about when school's going to start and what it has to look like. And, you know, they're just like every other district, just kind of waiting and seeing. But other than that, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any reports from any employee organizations or community comments? Was anything sent in, Todd?
Nothing was sent in, Mr.
Okay.
Gilbert.
Thank you.
The next item is superintendent's consent items. What I'd like to do is go over what's listed under each one. First of all is personnel items, retirements, resignations, any hiring. General business, this is our summer improvement contracts, and these have to be put out for bid. They have to be advertised. Bids are sent in, and if the bids are below what they were estimated to be at, the bid can be accepted. If all the bids come in higher than what was expected, it would be resent out. All of the bids met the specs and the requirements of what we were looking for, so the lowest bid was accepted based on what we needed. And so that's our 2021 summer permanent improvement contract. So it is going to include things like concrete sidewalk replacement at Coleraine High School, concrete sidewalk replacement and asphalt repairs at White Oak Middle School, concrete sidewalk and asphalt repairs at Houston Early Learning Center, storm drain repair, asphalt repairs at the playground at Montford Heights, and a new sidewalk for Taylor Elementary as they come off of the busy Springdale Road. Vendor contracts are all listed, all were budgeted for. And then donations to the school district. Any donation that is given to the school district has to be accepted by the board. And we had donations from Duke Energy, Donors Choose, Aruba, and the Cheviot Charitable Foundation, all greatly appreciated. And then lastly is our Well, we have two more. We have curriculum instruction. So it is student fees. It was presented as information at our last board meeting. It is for action. Student services presented as information at our last board meeting and now for action. And they are the student support guidelines of the code of conduct for the school year 2021. So the superintendent recommends the Board of Education approve the adoption of the superintendent's consent items as listed.
So moved. Second.
Great. There's been a motion and a second. Any questions or comments?
I have one question.
Sure.
Todd, could you elaborate on the Aruba donation?
Let me pull it back up here. Aruba Education Connectivity Kits, which will provide outdoor Wi-Fi connectivity to 6 more buildings. So students, if we have to and when we have to go back to remote learning, we'll be able to use outdoor Wi-Fi connectivity in our driveways and our school parking lots.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Vote passes 5-0. Thank you. The next item, 12.1, is the adoption of fiscal consent items. Ms.
Yes,
Amy?
good evening. This is to dispense with reading of and approve the minutes from our regular meeting on May 4th, as well as the financial reports for the month of April, which include all fund balances of almost $58 million and the general fund unreserved balance of almost $35 million. It also approves the revenues year to date at 92% for the year and expenditures at 82%, which is slightly under trend of 83% for 10 months through the year. Our investment average return is 1.34%, and this is down from 2.24% at the beginning of our fiscal year. And our monthly bills were our routine monthly bills, as well as the Montford Heights HVAC project and some auxiliary payments. We also have the accepting approving of our fiscal year 21 funds, and including the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund, which is the federal relief grant CARES Act funds to help us with PPE, technology connectivity, and PD involved with the pandemic. We also have a then and now certification over $3,000 for Our Lady of Grace counseling invoice. And finally, the annual transfers from the general fund to cover school fee waivers of about $47,000. So with that, I ask the board to adopt the fiscal consent items as listed.
So moved.
Second. There's a motion and a second. Are there any questions or comments for Amy? All right, we'll go on to the vote. Vote passes 5-0. Thank you. The next is 14.1, which is our 5-year forecast, and Amy Wells will present this.
Are you going to share the slide?
Yep. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, I have it up. Matt, it opened it up in another window.
Would it be easy for Amy to share her screen?
Probably
To
be
open
easy.
another window, down at the bottom, you'll see a button that says share screen. And then it should prompt you for which window to share.
On the second screen, Matt?
Yes.
I do not see that.
Okay. So it's in the main Zoom, like the program down at the bottom.
I'm using a different computer though for the
Okay.
school.
It needs to be on the same computer that has the Zoom meeting.
Oh, okay, that's the problem. Okay.
Okay.
Amy, can you share?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Amy, I have it up for you if that helps.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
So for the 5-year forecast, May is the update of our 5-year forecast. We do our original one in November, and then at the end of the year in May, we do a May update. And the 5-year forecast is the district's 5-year forecast approved by the Board of Education and filed with the Ohio Department of Education. Our operating revenues for the fiscal year of 20, the red line is what we projected in November, where we would be, and the blue line is where we're projecting we will end the year. So our property taxes were a little higher due to we had an increase in delinquent tax payments as well as public utility payments. And if you come down to about the middle, unrestricted grants and aid, that is a little less, about $1.8 million due to the governor cutting schools in the month of May. So we lost 6% of our annual funding from the state of Ohio, which is $1.8 million. And then towards the bottom, all other operating revenue is a little higher than we projected because of our Medicaid reimbursement came in twice as much as we were anticipating.
Good.
That's our revenues for the fiscal year of 21. The next slide is our operating expenses for fiscal year 20. Our operating expenses, again, the red line or the red bar is what we projected in November for the year. The blue bar is where we anticipate we will end for the year. Our supplies and materials, we were able to have some savings because of the schools closing in mid-March. However, our purchase services, we did have some additional special needs, and our costs and our other objects, which is our water and treasure fees, increased due to the increase in delinquent taxes and public utility that we just spoke about with the revenues. So due to being able to close our building in March, we were able to have some savings by limiting purchasing, reducing utilities, and some instructional materials. The next slide is talking about our operating deficit with the forecast. In November, we forecasted that we would have a projected $2.7 million deficit in fiscal year 20, our current fiscal year. With the state cutting us $1.8 million, this would have creeped up to $4.5 million operating deficit for the current fiscal year. But due to tightening belts and limiting our spending, we were able to end the year with a projected $2.4 million operating deficit. So we're still operating with an operating deficit, which means we need to right size our district, and our operating expenses are exceeding our revenues in our normal operating years. The next slide is just a reminder that we do have a resolution of partnership with our community to not increase our expenditures more than 3% per year. And the next slide, these are unprecedented times with the COVID-19 pandemic. And due to the recent economic effects of COVID-19 pandemic, the district is faced with significant reductions in projected revenue, requiring significant reductions in operating expenditures and services. The district needs to develop and implement plan reductions for fiscal year 21. Without proper fiscal management and community support, the district will be faced with further declining cash balances and more tough decisions. And so now we'll go into what it looks like going forward and how this does impact the district. On the next slide, we'll discuss the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the district's financial operations. We are projecting a $7.5 million reduction in revenue next fiscal year. This is due to anticipating a 10% reduction in state funding with a mild recession. We have only had 1 month's worth of results, a full month of April. So we're looking at May and June, and depending on how significant the trend goes or when the state reaches the bottom as far as tax revenues and loss of tax revenues, we will know how significant the recession could be. So if it ends up being a severe recession and lasting longer, it could be upwards of a 20% reduction, but we're projecting a 10% reduction in the 5-year forecast. We're also anticipating an increase in property tax delinquencies due to the effect on our local economy and our taxpayers. So we know our community has been hit hard with this pandemic, and so we want to project an increase in property tax delinquencies for fiscal year 21, getting a little better in 22, and then hopefully flattening out by 23. We're also anticipating a loss of rental income due to not being able to use our facilities by outside groups due to the cleaning requirements of COVID-19. Our interest rates have bottomed out, and so we're looking at a loss of revenue due to our interest rates. And the wellness and success dollars was supposed to have an increase next fiscal year due to the budget, but now we're anticipating that hopefully it just stays flat funded and not decrease. So these together add up to a $7.5 million reduction next fiscal year if these projections come to fruition. On the next slide, this is the operating deficit going forward and what it looks like based on what we're currently spending more than we're taking in, and in addition to the COVID-19 effects on our finances. So we already have projected an emergency levy in November for fiscal year 24. We have asked, we were talking with the community the last time we had a large levy, and the community told us to come back more often for smaller. So 23 was when we really needed to come, but we did try to push that out as long as possible. So that emergency levy is still projected for fiscal year 24. We're also anticipating this $6 million operating deficit is between the $2.6 million normal operations operating deficit and an additional $3 million due to the COVID-19 projected reductions in revenue. We are transitioning our revenue from the state up over the next few years. However, it's pretty flatlined back to current fiscal year. And if you remember back in the Great Recession, we were maintaining at our fiscal 09 levels for almost a decade. So we were not projecting much increase in state revenue going forward through the years of this 5-year forecast. And without consistent state revenue and other expenditures constantly increasing with inflationary increases, we always have to look at our operations and figure if we need to make internal reductions in order to stay right-sized and stay within our budget and our operating revenue. The next slide shows what the picture looks like in total for revenues, expenditures, and our cash balance. The blue bar is our revenue, the red bar is our expenditures, and these are without reductions of services, but with projected reduction in revenue. And the green line is our cash balance, which without making reductions to our operations, if in normal times, and then also if the state reduces our funding, we will not be able to sustain our cash balance and actually have negative cash by fiscal year 24. The next slide is our cash reserve policy. Our cash reserve policy requires that we have 60 days of cash on hand. And right now we do have the 60 days of operations on hand. And that is why we were able to absorb the $2.4 million, which is our operating deficit and the state reductions for the current fiscal year. However, this does take us down close to our 60 days, and we don't have enough to absorb another fiscal year of operating deficit. The next slide is our reserves. So to talk about our reserves and what's acceptable, it is acceptable to use our reserves in economic downturns. However, we have to think about the average recession can last at an average of 10 months. And the public sector lags the private sector in going into a recession and coming out of a recession due to the timing of taxes. So we need to make sure we have enough reserves on hand, knowing it's going to take a year to 2 years to fully recover, and then also for cash flow purposes. Right now, the county has already delayed tax collections for 30 days. The month of July, we received the majority of half of our taxes in the month of July, and with that being lagged 30 days, we need to make sure we have enough cash on hand to be able to pay our obligations and our expenditures, and mainly payroll. Without having these cash reserves, we would have to borrow funds in order to make payroll when there's a lag in those revenues. We also need to make sure we project our strategic plan priorities and fund them when we're looking at using reserves and also in reductions. It is possible during this time that we may need to have non-essential services or non-strategic plan priorities may need to be temporarily stopped in order to make sure that we can fund our priorities. And understand that once we've used these reserves, it is difficult to replenish them because our revenue and our expenditures were already in operating deficits, so there's not additional funds to replenish the reserves. By having the reserves, as I've discussed with the payroll, we need to be able to have cash flow and for timing of payments. But also those reserves help us keep our AA2 rating, which keeps the interest rates low for our community. It also helps us to offset unexpected expenses that may arise at any time. So we need to make sure that we're projecting for the long haul. We know it could take a year or two before the economy is back to where we were. And we know we need to have cash flow on hand to make sure we can make our expenses, our obligations, and our payroll.
Amy, can I ask a question?
Sure, Joe.
What types of could you give me some examples of non-essential services?
It would be items that are outside of our strategic plan that we currently offer. In our strategic plan, if you remember, has the 5 pillars. So we have our relentless focus on literacy, social, emotional, diversity, and inclusion, fiscal stability. And I'm sorry, I'm going blank on number 5. But if we're offering things like additional intervention services, additional pull-out programs, those are things that we might have to temporarily stop in order to be able to maintain our strategic plan priorities and in basic education.
Yeah, the one that wasn't there, Amy, was in student achievement, I believe. Um, Joe, so it's anything that is above and beyond what is required out of a basic education, which we had to talk about a lot when we were going through and passed our levy last November. So you're looking at class sizes in a classroom, you're looking at transportation, you're looking at every aspect that is above basic. So that does not include intervention, that does not include enrichment, gifted services, that doesn't include textbooks or any adoptions like that.
Thank you.
The next slide shows the full picture. The first 3 years are actual. Then we have fiscal 20, which is our current fiscal year, and then 21 through 24, the projected following 4 years of the 5-year forecast. Line 7 is where we're projecting cash balance to end. Line 9 is the cash balance reserve that we're required to have our 60 days of operations. And line 15 is the difference. So as you can see, the operating deficit does compound quickly. It also leaves us with negative cash in fiscal year 24. And the next slide is as we're transitioning our instructional operations from some or all of next fiscal year, adding additional services and supports. These will only add to difficult situations that we'll need to make. We have to determine what we minimally need to provide and how we'll accomplish this at the lowest expenses possible. And we need to add services from there. We need to make sure that we're staying within our projected budget. This is it's not going to be an easy task, but we need to be able to do this together, and we need to do what is best for our students in our community. And by looking at our forecasts and analyzing our services, we need to right now reduce our expenditures by $2.6 million. We've been talking about this for over a year. We talked about this during the levy season. Our operations exceed our revenues, so that's $2.6 million of operations that we have to reduce. We have reserves that we can utilize for the difference. And then we also need to think about the projected reductions in revenue. So if and when these reductions happen, we have to be ready to temporarily reduce our operations by possibly $3 more million. So our forecast for 21 has a $6.3 million deficit. And then going forward, it's 5.6 million operating deficit for the next few years, which is the 2.6 million plus the 3 million is the 5.6, and we need reserves for the additional 700,000 that we need for fiscal 21. So finally, I would just like to say to the board, to our administration, to our community, that these reductions are going to be difficult, and we need to increase our understanding and support from our community as we make these reductions, as to why we need to make these reductions, and we need to be able to stay within our budget going forward. Questions?
Amy, our cash balance reserve policy, at what point do we have to look at possibly changing that, or are we at a minimum by state regulations?
It's actually international regulations, not just state. It's just practice to have 60 to 90 days, and we're at 60. So without having those funds on hand, we could not get through next fiscal year without having those funds on hand and still make all of our obligations due to cash flow purposes.
Okay.
So if there's not any other questions, the treasurer and superintendent recommend the Board of Education approve the May 5-year forecast and assumptions as listed.
So
I
moved.
have one. I'm sorry, I have one quick question. Amy, does the budget does that have the reduction of the 2.6 in it for next year?
The forecast does not. The forecast shows next year's budget, which includes 2.6 million of operating expenditures outside of our normal operations that we can afford. The 5-year forecast includes the temporary appropriations, which are the next item.
Okay,
That the temporary appropriations, the next item we're going to go over is our current next fiscal year budget. So it's been
Okay.
incorporated into the 5-year forecast.
okay.
Amy, can I ask a question? Do you anticipate the state really lowering our financial aid to our district? I mean, they cut us pretty good this time. Do you anticipate a downward contribution by the state, if that's the right terminology?
I do. That's why there's a 10% projected reduction in next fiscal year.
And Amy, just so folks know, that 10% doesn't include the 6% that we've already lost, the 1.8 million. So that would be a 16% total reduction.
Correct. The 10%. So it would be about over $3 million in reduction of revenue from the state next fiscal year.
I just have a quick comment. If we closed our eyes and could go backwards and this pandemic didn't happen, knowing we've always known we were going to need to still tighten our belts, but I do want to say I think you and your department has done an excellent job with the 5-year forecast, looking how spot on you were on all those categories had we not lost that 1.8 that Governor DeWine just took away from us. So I think we all have to keep in mind a lot of this is beyond our control, what has happened, and this is going to be really tough for all of us. But people tend to always just want to shoot the messenger, and this isn't a Treasurer's Department problem. This is something that all of us have to work together to try to overcome. I'm not quite sure how we're going to do it, because this just makes you sick to your stomach, and thankful we did pass that levy back in November, or I'm not sure how we would do any of this at all. But I just want to say I think you did a good job on your projections. We didn't see, I mean, who sees a 100-year pandemic thrown in the mix of that? So that's all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
You know, Amy, I like how many other districts are, I mean, I'm assuming they're all going to be in the same boat that we're kind of in. These smaller districts that lost money, I mean, will they be able to even continue?
What the state did was when they made the cuts, they did an average of 3.7%, but wealthier districts like Northwest got a so some of the smaller districts that have more state funding were less than the 3.7%, where we were at 6%, because the state does consider us a wealthy school district.
Where does the state come up with this wealthy school district? I mean, I don't understand how they come up with this measure.
They look at our tax returns, and they look at our property tax valuation.
Okay.
I believe I heard a motion. Was that Jim?
Yes.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Joe. Passes 5-0. Thank you for the presentation, Amy. It's very good. Very detailed.
Thank you.
The next item is 14.2, temporary appropriations for 21.
Okay, yes. So temporary appropriations, this is our budget, or what everybody considers as our budget for fiscal 21, which starts July 1st. This $100 million was incorporated into the 5-year forecast, which next year, assuming we have the $7.5 million reduction, takes us to a $6.3 million operating deficit next fiscal year, which is $3 million more than our right size. So we have $2.6 million in this temporary appropriation that is still considered operating deficit for right sizing. So with that, the treasurer and superintendent recommend the Board of Education approve the temporary appropriations as listed.
So I have a question real quick, Amy. So is the deficit that we spoke of at the last agenda item, that was not removed out of this budget, correct?
No, this is the budgets that have been approved, pulled all together for all funds. So the general fund includes what's in the 5-year forecast.
Amy, do you have any other suggestions or recommendations for the board as far as this budget? Should we do reductions in this now, or like what other means should we take a look at for our operating deficit?
So these temporary appropriations include the 2.6. When last fall we were saying 2.7, it's 2.6 now of operating deficits in normal times. When the board approves this budget, it gives me the authority to spend up to this amount of money in all these funds, including $100 million of general fund.
And as we work as an administrative team, we are already looking at what we can do to take care of the 2.6. We also have the CARES funding that we're trying to see what it can be appropriated for and how much will have to be used for PPE devices when we return to school and what can be used there. But for the last month, we are working on what possible reductions can be made at every level, working with our administrators, sharing information with them, meeting with them at their building level to see what they can look at reducing in order to take care of this piece. However, none of it is official until we find out what goes on for May. And that could be June 10th, I believe, Amy's usually when the state puts that out, around the 10th of each month. How did the reopening go? How much did we lose in money? That's the key part that we don't know yet. She's projecting 10%, could be 15% plus the other 6%. We just don't know yet. And the better the reopening goes, the better or less money we'll lose. But if the reopening of Ohio does not go well, there will be more and more decreased funding. I've had several people email me and say, what can they do? And I've got a lot of this to go over in my superintendent's update. But the best thing you can do is to contact your legislators and tell them to fund schools. Because if schools can't function because of reductions, then we can't provide school for kids and parents can't go to work. What we can take care of is reducing what we need to at that 2.6, and that's what we're currently working on.
But to be clear, we have not reduced anything yet. The 2.6 is in the forecast and it is temporary appropriation.
Okay.
So Amy, when you say right size the district and we're talking about, reducing deficit spending even further. Is it within the temporary appropriations where we would do something like that?
Temporary appropriations is our budget for the year. So right now it includes 2.6 million more than we normally can operate with, and a possible 3 million more depending on just what reductions happen.
When do you guys feel that these reductions are going to say, hey, we're going to get rid of this or that, or what's the anticipation? Obviously, we can't run a district in be in deficit spending. So when is the time frame that the cuts that you guys are going to come up with to present to us?
As we've talked and as we've met, we're looking to see what the May reduction will be, and that will come in the first week of June. Then we will have some pretty good numbers on what we need to do. So toward the middle of June, end of June, these reductions could possibly start occurring, and we have to get to the right size piece, which is we had time before the pandemic, but we do not have that time anymore. So you are looking at anything and everything that we provide as a school district. It's the amount of aides we need in our buildings, the amount of teachers we need. Does class sizes go up? Do we take transportation to a 2 mile above a 1 mile? Look at all our administrative staffing. Look at all of our services that we provide, and we provide a lot that is above and beyond. Taking title funds and using them in a different way to help reduce class sizes. So it's looking at everything, and just wrapping up the school year has been the main function here, because there's been a lot of concerned parents over graduation, a lot of concerned parents over grades, and so hopefully everybody realizes we got to 1.8, and that 1 month was equal to the entire year of the 2008 recession, I believe. And so not knowing what May is going to be, not knowing what June's going to be, if it resurfaces and they close everything down again in July, these are just going to keep coming. And then it comes to a point, can you afford to open school? Because we're in the people business, and you have to have people to educate kids. So 85%, I believe, is what we spend our monies on. And if you don't have the services to provide kids, you can't really give them the education they need. But I would say, unless Amy, if you feel differently, but middle of June, we'll have a good grasp. By the end of June, we'll have our list of recommendations coming to you, probably that second June board meeting, on possible reductions we need to make. We're just still waiting to see what the final number is.
Some of the reductions, obviously, with people in that, are you going to look at salary reductions or anything like that? Or are you just looking at services and employees? When you say right size,
we have to look at everything. So negotiations are coming up. You look at reductions in employees. You look at reductions possibly in pay. You look at pay freezes. You look at pay step freezes. You have to look at everything. There is no magical answer to this, but it's something we're going to collaborate with our building principals and getting everybody to understand it's not about the name and the position. It's about what we can afford and what we can do. So it's trying to make reductions across the board. And a lot of school districts, as you said, are in the same boat we are, and we're all sharing ideas. We're all collaborating, and I'll have some more updates when I get to my piece, but that's where we are with the reductions right now.
Quick
Todd,
question.
could
The
one of the reductions be in the AP programs, the academic programs offered? So then we would gut that whole thing and then just go back to basic education?
Well, any of that right now would be a guess. That's something we have to work on. We have to see what it costs to run each program. So we're busy working on that, meeting twice a week, trying to determine what the biggest cost is. But any area could be affected. Intervention, enrichment, gifted, AP, anything.
Quick question. We've been talking about the 2.6 million even before the levy, right? Is that correct?
Correct.
So
Correct.
haven't we been having these conversations since prior to the levy to be able to have a head start on this, because by us, the longer we wait, and now we got hit with the pandemic that, believe me, nobody saw coming. It's
You're muted,
You got
Pam.
muted.
You're muted, Pam. Pam, nobody can hear you. You're on mute.
Pam, nobody can hear you.
okay.
There
I'm
we go.
sorry, I must have bumped that. So my question is, the 2.6 million, isn't that what we've been saying ever since, even prior to the levy, that even with the passage of this levy, we're gonna need to cut, we're still gonna need to tighten our belts? Is that right?
Yes, the 2.6 is the right sizing, what we've been talking about for a year. We needed to change our operations because our current revenue we couldn't afford our operations with our current revenue.
I
Then in a
guess,
possible,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say a possible 3 million on top of the 2.6 if reductions happen or when reductions happen from both state and local. That, as Todd was saying, the state's gonna look at what happened in May, probably in June also. They don't release their reports till the 10th of the month, so they're not giving anything till even July 10th. Our fiscal year starts July 1, and our expenditures start July 1. So, I mean, when they made cuts in May, it's the end of our year. Trying to find savings while we did was not easy because most of our expenditures are done in the summer months as we gear up for the year. So once the year starts in July 1, the longer the state waits to make decisions on what they're going to do, the harder it will be for us to find those savings because we're already having expenditures happen.
But I guess my question is, hasn't there been ongoing dialogue since even before the levy, that if the pandemic hadn't happened, would we already by now have known a plan of what we were going to do to, you know, make cuts to get rid of that 2.6 deficit? I guess my fear is I understand the May thing and waiting to see because it's going to be more, but I don't know. It just seems like the longer we put it off, the bigger hole we're in.
Well, if
I
you
mean,
looked at Amy's forecast from October and others, we knew that our funding was going to stay somewhat the same, continue, that we had a deficit there, and that we could gradually relieve all of it over time and get rid of the 2.6 and make the promise of keeping our levy last as long as we could by doing that reduction. The pandemic did disrupt this altogether. We are close to knowing exactly what we need to reduce to get rid of the 2.6, but it's making sure that we are making the best choices for kids. Very difficult to make any reductions when you know your kids are going to come back to school whenever they do, whether it be August, September, October, November, December, or January, and not have the social and emotional support they're going to need, and making those reductions. So before the pandemic, we could relieve some each year, start reducing, hopefully see an influx in our enrollment. But if since things have changed, there's new things that affect it. So if everybody's going to start with remote learning next year, why pay fees to go to schools when Northwest is going to offer it to you? I have some parents right now who don't want their kids to go to school. They've been very clear with that in their emails and their phone calls. And so they're wondering what we can do for a full year of online learning. So we're looking at providing that for our folks also. But as these things happen, changes will occur. And we have made reductions over the year. I think we remember some of the reductions and what we had to go through with making 1 mile the transportation limit. And I think every district in the state now is going to look at 2 miles. And so some of the things I have to talk about later aren't even doable because you would need extra transportation to have them happen. But without the pandemic, we were in the process of making reductions and having a plan over a period of time. And we are now in collaboration about what these reductions will be and working on it twice a week just to get things in order. And most of the time, 5 days a week through communication.
Thank you.
So So if we want to make further reductions, you're saying we're gonna have decisions to make in June, at our June meeting? And
Possibly June, possibly July, possibly August, depending on how each month goes with the reopening.
do we still currently only have one June meeting?
I believe there's two
Yes.
scheduled. Okay, then we'll have to
It's
add another one.
I think it's like June 29th. It's towards the end of the month is our next meeting.
You know, we can always add one. in
Right.
there.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah.
kind of what I'm getting at. It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
our next
I
one
think
is-
we would add
I
one
think that's a
for
good idea.
around the 10th or 11th, look at the calendar and then put some dates and notifications out. Since we have us all here together, if we could get a nomination to have a board meeting on Monday, June 8th, might be a good time to put one in, considering when the other one is.
Do you think that's too early in the month before the state comes out with their,
I do.
I mean,
Amy, do you think the 15th would be better? You know, usually when the stuff comes out.
Well, the 10th is when when OBM releases their monthly report. I just don't know if the governor's going to take action before he sees the end of June. So that might not be until July. And our fiscal year starts July 1. And again, that's just the possible 3 million additional deficit. The 2.6 is pandemic, no pandemic, normal operations, 2.6. We are budgeting 2.6 million more than we currently can afford to operate with.
so we need to basically, we got to come up with 2.6 million to come out of that budget right now, before we hear anything from the governor in the state in June.
It's two different things, correct?
Right. So we need to have something in line for that. I mean, like right now.
That's why I think Monday, June 8th might work the best.
So why wouldn't we take the 2.6 out of this temporary appropriation now?
Because we haven't made any cuts.
But this is for 2021.
But
I mean,
Pam's
if
right,
you-
we have not. Sorry,
I'm sorry. So I'm just saying, so if we have to reduce this 2.6, and the temporary appropriation doesn't reflect that right now, like, so as we reduce that, shouldn't we right size this appropriation now?
Well,
you
until,
could.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Pam.
I mean, you know much better than me. I mean, my first thought is until we've made those cuts, how do we know they won't roll into that next year if they're still there? I mean, we haven't made those cuts yet. I don't know.
Well, the other thing you have in there, Amy, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have the emotional social funds, which were given, which are covering some of the money. And so is that used up in your 5-year forecast and covering, and the 1.8 million in CARES funding?
They're not in general fund. They're in separate funds, but they're part of the temporary appropriations. Reducing the temporary appropriations does limit the budget. However, it doesn't tell us where. So kind of, I mean, a mix of Mark and Pam. What Pam's saying was actual reductions would tell me where to reduce. Mark, reducing just reduces the overall picture, and then reductions have to come from somewhere because there's nowhere in the budget for 2.6 million.
I think that just prolongs the inevitable. I mean, I think we need to make the tough call of what that 2.6 is going to be, and then it can be taken out of that projection.
Well, by June 8th, we could list, Amy, and correct me if I'm wrong, because of our discussions we've been having, what the 2.6 would look like. Communicate with our leadership team, which is the administrators across the district, make sure they have an understanding of what it is, give input and feedback, and make the decision by the June 8th meeting for a reduction package.
We can do that. It's gonna be quick. We have a week to,
Well, that's what I was
communicate with them.
concerned, right, because we need to communicate with people. So the 15th works, and because of the pandemic, everything's had to be sped up. As I said before, that we could make reductions gradually here and there and get to 2.6 gone, but that's not an option anymore. Unless you agree. I mean, it's,
no, I think we have to bring a list. I'm just, June 8th puts a timeline on the table to get it done.
June 15th gives us more time, and we have a lot going on right now, as I haven't even gotten to my report yet. So it makes it very difficult by the 15th for sure, but the 8th does tighten the timeline.
Todd, have you informed the principals and the other personnel in the schools about the impending situation we have now?
We have worked with our elementary principals, our middle school and our high school principals in separate meetings to get their ideals on reductions that they could sustain and make. We have also listed what we think has to be done in order to get to the 2.6. So it's working with that. An email and a video has gone out to our staff and public explaining where we are with the funding of 1.8 million being cut and more coming. We're just waiting for that final. So yes, those discussions have all begun. And like I said, everything has been sped up tremendously. The first thing we had to do is close out the school year. And that was not very easy considering what we had to do to close the school year, and still going through graduations as we speak. So it does take time to do everything that needs to be done, plus what we're trying to plan for next year.
Todd, when we look at these reductions, can we have a breakout of what the administrators recommend versus what administration recommends?
It will most likely be the same thing because the final recommendation will be given input from all. So
Okay.
Are you wanting an AO cabinet pitted against building administrators, or I'm not sure what you're asking for, because we all work together as we put it.
Pitted, but I mean, anytime you have like the administrative team working out, they don't know what's possibly going on in the school as far as like, what position or what activity or whatever that would be a reduction. I mean, the folks in the buildings know their buildings better than anybody. So I was just curious how, how that gels together as far as like, if somebody makes a recommendation of this and you guys have a different recommendation, how does that come together? Is there like a trumping factor that you say that this is what we're going to do, or how does that work?
Each building principal knows exactly what each position costs in their school. So any reduction they make in any area, whether it be an aide, a teacher, any part of their facility, custodians, if we make reductions district-wide, they all know what that adds up to. Daryl's got a sheet together that shows each and every one of them. What it comes down to is they will have a chance to provide input and put what's out there, and then we'll either go back and say, well, it's not enough, you need more. And the hard part is it can't be about individual people. It's got to be about how do we save and get to the mass total, working as a team to get where we need to make the reductions. And so that's what we've been working on them with. We are gathering facts as we speak. We are looking at these reductions as we go forward and gathering their input. So a final recommendation will come to you from me with their input gathered, and a team collaboration effort from building principals and AO. Is there times we don't agree because it might come down to a person versus a class or something else? We have to do what's best for our kids. We can't do what's best for relationships and individuals that we've made over the years. So any recommendation we make with a reduction is always gathered with their input.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
I think that's why we need to get the list of this 2.6 million, these cuts, as soon as possible. I mean, I would rather not wait. I want to know. I mean, I don't know what the rest of the board members think, but I want to get that, and we need to, we owe it to our employees and that stuff. Hey, this is what we're going to have to reduce. This is what we're going to, have to cut if we, I mean, obviously we got to come up with $2.6 million in cuts. I mean, we owe it to them to let them know as soon as possible. And I think that's kind of where I'm at on it.
And it's not just our district that is going through this. There are several reductions
All
everywhere.
districts are. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, I've talked to every one of, a lot of our board members from our Butler Tech board, and every district's going through this.
So approving the temporary appropriations for fiscal year 21 doesn't tie our hands and prohibit us from making cuts in June for fiscal year 20.
No.
Okay. Because I think that's kind of what I'm getting at, and what I'm hearing from some of the others is that at least for myself, deficit spending isn't a sustainable business model. So something needs to be done about that. And that's going to involve cuts.
Approving the budget and not taking action later will just spend the 2.6 million again. But it doesn't tie your hands from making adjustments later.
Okay.
Again, and I think some of the key things to remember here have not yet been negotiated. So when negotiations start, and we have no idea what negotiations will be like, but freezing steps or freezing years, reductions in salary does save people. Is there agreement on that through negotiations? Furlough. Are we going to be allowed to furlough folks? Or we can obviously RIF anyone. And there's nothing pleasant about that also. But there are several things that can reduce factors that we've been discussing all along. And anything's an option.
Ugly times.
Very much so.
Yeah.
So, Todd, have we decided on the 15th of or the 18th of June? Is
The
that
8th or the
day,
15th are the 2
15th?
Mondays.
Is that
Yeah.
when you? Yeah. So I don't know about the rest of you. It doesn't make any difference to me. We got to get something done here.
Yeah.
And instead of having one board meeting, we can have 2 board meetings. Do what?
I just said either is good for me, whichever everybody recommends. Or
Yeah.
I think we
Amy,
should
you-
have the 2 board meetings, Joe. I agree with you. We should have those 2 board meetings.
Yeah. We need to get on this real quick.
Amy, do you have a recommendation for the 8th or 15th?
I can do either. It's fine.
I'm available for either date.
I think that was
I
a
will
good,
say. Sorry, Pam.
oh no, that's okay. I hadn't looked at that other aspect of, I mean, the sooner we can let our employees know if, it's something, obviously this is going to affect our staff. And if there's a chance positions are going to get eliminated or what, I mean, I think we owe it to them to try to a week could make a difference for them to get out there and find something else. I don't know.
Well, that's going to be pretty tough because the rest of the school districts are going to do the same thing we're doing.
Right.
sure. Todd, do you think you can, and Amy, do you think you can pull all this together by the 8th? I know the week would give you a little bit more time, but keeping with what Pam's saying and everybody else.
I think one thing to remember is as teachers may look at what Northwest is being reduced, they have till July 10th to resign, which gives you almost a month from the 15th. The 15th gives us more time to communicate with our employees. But if the 8th is where you want to go, we can make either one happen.
I mean, I'll go with the majority, but like I said, to Joe's point, Joe, you're right. All districts are going to be doing this. So if we do it a little bit earlier and give those employees a jump on something, I don't know. But then again, there might not be any district in the state of Ohio that's hiring anybody for anything. So then it's kind of irrelevant. So,
Correct.
So I'm okay with whichever.
Could we do it the 15th? Because that'll give Amy a little more time instead of jumping on it on the 8th. Is that more feasible for you, Amy?
Not me, it's the team and.
It's our team. It's all of
Yeah.
us and our administrators.
Okay.
So the 15th is going to work better for all. But if
Great.
we need to do the 8th, we can make it happen.
Got
There's
it.
some tough decisions that these guys are going to have to make, and I'd rather give them the extra time to make those decisions, and then you can come back at us.
Okay.
I mean, it's going to be tough.
I'm hearing the 15th.
Yeah.
Yes. And remember, if it's the 2.6 is more right sizing, so these are long-term reductions. This isn't temporary due to pandemic reduction of state revenue and stuff that can be added back. This is long-term reductions.
Yeah, I think Pam said it very well. We knew about this before the levy, but we were looking at it being over the long term, and it did not have to be immediate. With the pandemic, it changes things. So makes it tough. Just like our community's facing tough times.
Sure. All right. So do we have to make a motion for the 15th?
Do we need to vote on the temporary appropriations first?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please.
Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Passes 5-0 for the temporary appropriations. Do we need a motion for the 15th, or we just put that in there?
Just out of
You
me.
do.
You do need a motion.
Oh, really?
You need to vote on us. It's a special meeting.
It'd be a special meeting. Yep.
So moved.
Do we do that here in electronic school board, or do we just put it into the minutes?
I can call roll and we can just put it in minutes. Pam motioned, be in a second.
Yep.
Second.
And then we take a
I'll
vote.
just,
Is this also where we want to have the discussion about whether we're going to continue with the virtual meeting or in person?
You can do it now, or you can do it after my report. It's up to you guys. Your meeting.
Yeah, I'd rather have it at where we had it at Houston last time, when we spaced everybody. I think that way we can get some of the community people into that and give them the hands-on thing and tell them this is what we got to do. Because I don't know how many people are watching our stuff at Waycross.
I think it's
Probably
important to
not.
remember that if you're going to do a in-person meeting, masks are required, social distancing is required. We're going to need to put sanitizer in place as people enter and go. So we're going to have to follow all the rules and regulations that are set forth by the governor.
Okay.
I agree with Jim. I think we should do this, have it at Houston.
Houston may not be big enough. We might have to pick a location that's larger. Might have to be one of the elementary schools.
I just think we need to be very aware
Whatever,
of social distancing and overcrowding.
Sure.
So,
I mean, the Houston, the room that we've done them in Houston is a nice room, but
yeah. And we don't have much attendance at all during the summer, as a reminder.
sure, yeah. Okay.
whatever is agreeable with everybody else, but I think that, you know, we need to involve the public and be pretty much transparent with them as far as what's going to happen here.
Yeah, the first thing I have to check is, I just want to remind you guys, I'm not telling you how to run your meeting or what to do, but for graduation, only 10 people were allowed in the auditorium. Between the 5 of you, Amy, myself, Chris, and Matt Fisher, we are pretty much at 10. I don't know if we're allowed to have more than that. So something to consider.
Okay.
Because that is a mass gathering. So I can't see, other school boards are staying remote. So I can check with all of them, but I've got to check with the health department. We'll get Chris McKee on that, but there are a lot of restrictions about going back at this time.
You know, I had talked to a couple of my fellow Butler Tech, and they've been having their meetings. I know Monroe did. Can't think of the other two, but there was 3 of them that they're doing their meetings, you know, in person. Yeah, they only had 5 or 7 people total in the room, but they're having their meetings together.
Yeah, I mean, us as a group together is not a problem whatsoever. We can do the
Right.
10 social distancing. The guest thing, I don't think they're going to allow to change. I
And
could be
if that's
wrong.
the way it is, then that's the way it is. Then they'll have to watch it, you know, like we're doing now on, you know, you can Zoom.
I kind of see the pros and cons, though. I agree with Joe as far as we're making these kind of decisions. You want to be transparent, but then again, on the flip side, the whole thing could backfire on us, because if we go into this doing it and what we feel is the right thing, being transparent, and then we don't let people in, or we only let the first 3 in, you're going to have a lot of ticked off people. So I think we need to think,
Yeah,
and
but
I'm not saying which is the right answer. I don't know.
they need to realize what the rules are that the governor has set up for large meetings. I mean, it's not our decision, it's the governor's decision on, you know, if you're allowed to have 10 people in a meeting or 15 or whatever that number is.
And I agree with that, but if our sole purpose of meeting in person is because we want to be transparent and we want the public to be able to talk to us, which I think that's where Joe is going, and I agree 100%, but listening to this, it doesn't sound like that's even going to be an option. So are we going to make it worse by having a meeting inside a building and not letting anybody in? I mean, we'd be better off keeping it remote, but make sure we're reaching out to really tell people, if you have comments or questions, you've got to get them into, you know, Todd or whoever it is prior to the meeting. That's all I'm saying. If everybody could come in, I absolutely think that that's a meeting to have in person. I just don't want it to backfire if we're going to go over and then we have people and we can't let them in. Because this is going to be a really, really tough meeting. You don't want to tick people off for the wrong reasons. So I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, the most important thing is to set the date. I can get a hold of the health department person or get Chris McKee in the morning to see what we're allowed, and that may make your decision pretty simple. And then I can reach out to all of you tomorrow afternoon and let you know.
Although on the flip side, I think, what is it, June 1st or the end of May, you're allowed to have a wedding reception with 300 people. So I'm not sure how
Yeah.
they can put it up to 10.
That's a good point. That's
Wedding
very
reception.
true.
Although you're not allowed to dance. No
Jeez.
dancing. I read that in small print. So I don't know. That's a lot of money to spend and nobody can
Well,
dance.
not knowing all these things, I think that's even more important, because we would need to set up our venue if guests are allowed to come in and make community comments so we could have the right protections in place and so on and so forth, no matter what the location is.
The no dancing thing is going to be the premise for Footloose 2.
I don't know, I kind of think with what we know today that I'm leaning more towards, I mean, I agree with Joe. I understand. It's like, I want to get back to, in-person meetings, but I don't want to do it prematurely. So it seems like for at least the 15th that we continue having the virtual meeting that we,
The other thing we can do on our side is push out communication starting June 1st through the 15th and do everything we can to get questions or answers and work with Lindsay on the communication piece to make sure they are aware. And then once we get a final decision, like you said, maybe it does take care of it, that Greg Kesterman will allow us to do certain things. Right now, though, we're still sending everything to him for approval. So that's why I can't give you an answer right now.
Okay. All right.
So the 15th is okay for a date. And I just got a note from Lindsay that we've got 58 people on Facebook watching the meeting live right now. So some are tuning in. So it's, if they do keep the mass gatherings at 10, there still is folks watching.
All right.
I think we're also being streamed on the Waycross channel too, if I'm not mistaken.
So Mark, did you get you'll probably need to get a first and a second for the 15th of June. And
I believe.
Okay.
We have it. I just need to do the roll.
Okay.
So are you ready for the roll then, Mark?
Sure.
Okay, so Pam,
Aye.
Jim,
Aye.
Joe,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
and Mark.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
And then we can, like we send out notifications for all board meetings that all of you guys have seen. We will make sure location and if attendance can occur, whatever, as we get closer. And, we may know something Friday and then Tuesday when they open weddings back up, it may all change. And then so We'll keep you guys informed for sure. But I will get a hold of each of you tomorrow afternoon to let you know what I find out from Greg Kesterman, since we're going to look into this for sure.
All righty. Thank you. 15.1 Student Service Handbooks.
Yes. Let me get down to it. I apologize. I'm sliding on down. All right. This is for information only. It is Student Services Handbooks. They are the 2021 Student Service Handbooks are presented as items for information. These items we brought back at the June 15th board meeting. It is enrollment handbook, attendance, coaches, athletic director, athletic participation consent form, and health assistant policy manual. Look them all over, and if you have any questions, please let me know, and I will bring them back to you.
Great, thank you.
Next one is 15.2, revision of the 2021 school calendar. So this is going to lead into my update. And so this is for information only. No changes have been made, but some things I want to go around that wraps into this. So this school year ended as no other has, as you all know. Several things are going on simultaneously as we start into the summer. As Amy said, we will leave no stone unturned as we look for final numbers for the BOE to do the reductions that are needed due to COVID. The only factual numbers we know right now, like she said, is that we were reduced 1.8 million for 1 month. And as I said earlier, that was pretty much equivalent to the 2008. We did in 1 month what happened over a year in 2008 with the recession. The 2.6 is reductions that we were going to make gradually as the levy was extended, and we told our voters that we would work on, but now that timeline has been pushed up immensely. So we're currently looking at 2 different calendar versions and 2 different ways that right now we are allowed to start school. This all came to a head when we sent a survey out that asked our parents, would you prefer a remote learning model or a blended learning model? There was a lot of anger, a lot of stuff that came back and said, no, why don't we have an option of a full return to school? Well, as of today and through May, we are not allowed to return to school on a full return. They are also predicting through Dr. Acton that there is going to be a relapse. And she's saying September, but we don't know. So the one version that we are allowed to look at is a blended learning version. We have been told it is a partial return of students, but when they return, we have to keep social distancing in place. Students and staff all staying 6 feet apart while coming to school, being at school and leaving school 6 feet apart. And this includes transportation. So the very first part of their day is how do they get on the bus? And depending on the building you're in our district, some of our classrooms can hold 9 students plus a teacher for 10. Some are only big enough to hold 6 at 6 feet apart, plus a classroom teacher for 7. They also want us to look at dine-in room options, staying in one room all day long, and keeping the 6-foot distancing in place. And that's the blended version. Option 2 is remote learning, which I understand people need to go back to work, and I agree with you. Because the more people work, the more our community gets off unemployment, get their jobs back. It really helps them as a family to know where their income's coming from, but it also helps the sales tax in Ohio, which is where 40% of our funding comes from. I know that not many were happy with the email and the survey that we sent out, but however, there's several things to remember. We're being told about the peak, and these 2 plans, I think, are going to come into play for the next 6 months, because if we have a bad month, there is a chance they would close us down again, is what we've been told. We have to look at how things go on in individual buildings. Maybe one elementary building has a lot of COVID cases break out. And we are responsible 100% for tracking all students, limiting who comes in our schools, whether you're a parent or volunteer. And decisions are going to be made based upon the safety and student of the staff and the students. We need a certain amount of staff in each building to cover our students, perform daily functions. And if there's an outbreak, that's going to affect that. COVID also requires a lot of systems to be put in place to monitor students and staff. And like I said, it starts with transportation. What will it look like for our bus drivers as they arrive at a bus stop and they are being required as of right now to assess the situation? We must also keep them and all employees safe. So there is talk of providing a plastic shield, separating the bus driver from the students as they enter. Who's going to pay for that? They're not very cheap. And where's that going to come from? If you're a bus driver and you're 58 years of age or older, or a teacher or a classified employee, you have more possibilities of difficulty than other folks. So that's an issue also. As of now, we don't have a final decision on how many students are allowed on a bus. Is it 1 per seat? Is it every other seat? They have not come up with that yet, and we're being told it will not be till probably July before we get that. Some people said, well, go a half day. Well, that doubles our routes. If they're cutting us 7.5 million possibly, we don't have extra money to run extra routes. So it'd be very expensive, and not much we can do about that. Prior to entering schools, they're telling us we need to have screenings, washing stations everywhere, having students bring their own water bottles so they're not touching the water fountains, pushing the button. We have to clean the halls thoroughly daily while they're at school, and when they leave, we have to clean each classroom thoroughly and make sure we've got everything we need there. Taking the temperature just before they come into school. How does that look, and how do you do it? And the parents doing the same as the requirement right now. Masks are the #1 cost we have to supply for every student, which we have 8,900, and every employee, which is 1,200 right now. This is very costly. And some of the CARES funding will have to be used for this. So as we continue to look at what the requirements are for CARES funding, and we're just getting that released by the state, we're looking at the different ways it can go. So if you look at adjusting the school calendar for next school year, we're looking at the possibility that school may not go in kids till September 1, September 2. We have to provide PD and safety. We have to practice our routines. We're going to have to bring staff in, keep social distancing, keep training, which is appropriate. And we're going to need to create new lessons that can be delivered in person and remotely. So as we start to look at a calendar, what I wanted to talk about is there may be some changes. If you looked at the way the school year ended, the governor just removed the calendars that were in place and said they have the authority to shut down, and then gave us 24 to 48 hours. And our teachers did a great job of supplying remote learning. And I know folks weren't happy with that. That's very difficult. Parents are trying to work from home. Parents are trying to watch their kids. We appreciate all they did, and we appreciate their efforts. But we didn't choose to shut down. We were shut down. And we're not choosing to have only two options for next year, but our only two options, unfortunately, are a blended learning model and then be ready to go if we're back all remote. So August could look vastly different. We've got to make sure we got our routines in place. Who's checking temperature? Who's monitoring hall space? Who's going to deliver the food from the cafeteria to the kids in their classrooms? How are we going to pick it back up? How are we going to get rid of it? What employees are needed for this? I go back to the school buses. How does that look? If you can only haul 20 on a bus that seats 50, that's a lot of routes we can't afford. So I realize parents need to work. I'm 100% with you. And we're even going to work on options that if we're blended and not everybody's back, how do we provide some type of daycare? Are we allowed to provide some type of daycare? And trying to figure that out. There's lots of rumors, lots of things are being thrown around. Some people are saying blended learning for K through 5, K through 6 students, and then middle school and high school go back remote learning. And these are suggestions and rumors that are coming from the governor's office, none of which have been allowed yet, but or told what we're doing. And do I see an answer anytime soon? I really don't. He's saying he's going to wait to August, see how things are going, where's the curve at, and what we can do. So we continue to work on our budget, and the funding will lose. Hopefully it's just for the month of May, and things get really well and people stay safe. And every day you're finding out something new from the CDC on how you can contract it, how we thought you got it, but now you don't get it. And it's just ever changing. And that makes this the really hard part. My hope is the reopening in Ohio goes very well. The economy rebounds and it's not as severe as we think. But yeah, we do have some tough decisions on it. We've been working, and we will collaborate as a team. And when I say a team, it's Daryl, it's Amy, it's Todd, it's Chris, it's every building principal and assistant principal we have looking at a list of what possible reductions could be, and trying to come up with the best scenario that always goes back to what's the best for kids. Nobody wants to talk about intervention services. We're going to need more intervention and social emotional support for kids than ever when they come back, because remote learning is not the perfect answer. But we also need adults who make a difference in kids' lives. And that's tough also when you only have so much money. So none of the decisions coming up are easy. Doing a 5-year forecast in the middle of this, I met with probably 39 superintendents and treasurers Friday, and forecast 5 put some things out there and nobody has an answer. We can guess, we can try to determine what it's going to be based on what we're seeing, but the 10th of each month becomes a key time, like Amy said, because they'll get the reports then. But like Amy said, how soon will Governor DeWine react to that? And how soon will he let us know what the reduction is going to be? A lot of people, after I told them about the survey, and they said, why did we only get 2 options? I said, well, they were the only 2 options we were allowed to get. What can I do to help? What you can do to help is write your legislators in the House and in the Senate. Tell them to fund schools, and hopefully the folks who we voted on to lead us up at the state realize that you got to have some type of school, because parents can't go to work if they're sitting at home with their kids. So we get that. We feel for you. The unemployment rate is the highest it's ever been for everybody. And you know, the way schools finished the school year was not a replicate of how community members finished school, drawing unemployment and so on and so forth. And it makes it very, very tough. So hard decisions, hard times, but we'll work together. We'll get through this, because our hope is the reopening goes well. Actually, hopefully it goes great. People follow the social guidelines, keep your distance apart, and do what you need to do. And I just ask people to be kind. I mean, there's no shaming that should go on because someone chooses to wear a mask. And you might say, well, then why, Mr. Bowling, are you requiring our employees? Because we are responsible for our employees. They work for us, and we want them to be safe, and we will require masks for every one of them. Custodians are going back in full force in June to clean the buildings, get them ready. We're requiring masks. We're requiring social distancing. We're following the same guidelines that the governor's putting out to everybody and enforcing in schools. So the mask will become one of the big issues. How do you help a little first grader or second grader who just lose track of what they're doing and all of a sudden they're masked off? But we got to work on those things, and that's why our training's got to be in place. And we got to remember we're in this business for kids, and we got to do what's best for them. So that's all I have, but I'd be glad to answer any questions you guys might have.
Thanks, Todd. Any questions for Todd? Comments?
You know, Todd, I mean, when you're talking about requiring everybody to have a mask, do we need to pass a board policy to?
I don't know if we need a policy because it's an order right now. What we do need to do is find the funding for it. They're not cheap. Some are washable. I've heard some get up to 50 or 70 washes. Some need to be replaced after 8 hours. So it depends on what type we're getting. And the number one job is to protect our employees. Kids can carry it, they cannot get it. I mean, every day it's changing, depends on what's happening in a different state. But we do know our adults and our older adults can get them, and we've got to be very careful with that. And that's why the masks are required. And some of it that I've heard from just listening is to keep hands off face, because that's one of the ways it's transmitted. But, you know, depending on the type of mask you get, they're not very cheap. And they've got to figure out a way that, you know, we're just one of 601 school districts. So we have 1,200 employees. There's a whole lot more in the state of Ohio that are going to be needing masks as we reenter. And you know what? Our community has been great with that. Some of you and your family have made masks, churches making masks. I mean, the outreach by the community, the support is so greatly appreciated. Kind of ties into the food service that we're doing, and we will continue to deliver over the summer, delivering a lot of meals to a lot of needs, because a lot of people are still on unemployment. And that's why we got to hope this reopen goes well so people can get their jobs back and do what they need to do.
Todd, are we doing anything right now to get some masks?
We are collaboratively working with Hamilton County and Butler County. All the business directors are reaching out for bids. And we are trying to get everything for a wholesale bulk price because all of us are going in together. So a lot of pressure is coming in. But as you've heard, certain people are in control of the mask and are charging a lot of money for them right now. So even buying in bulk for 15 school districts is the best way to get the price down, but it's still expensive.
Yeah.
So yeah, we are collaborating constantly with other superintendents, other treasurers, other business directors, curriculum, talking to every school district on what the best learning model might be when we can come back in a blended setting and bring the kids back to school. So every day, every week.
Todd, for my job, I set up an agreement with Battelle out of Columbus to sterilize our masks at work. That may be an option. They put them in a rotation and sanitize them and send them back to you. And there's, like for us, there's funding that it won't cost us anything. So that may be an option for the school district to use Battelle.
Yeah, I got to tour the Battelle facility as part of our team, along with Brenda Miller. And it was a great experience, and they're doing a lot of great things to help with COVID. And then we've got Procter & Gamble right here in town also that we're trying to talk to folks and see what support we can get there also. But yes, that and stuff like that is exactly what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Good point.
Anything else?
I think it's just important to note that it's the sooner the better to plan for these variables and not waiting till, we can't wait till August to make decisions for the various options, based on we're following the governor's guidelines.
Yeah, and there's no waiting. I know all the school districts are putting plans in place. We're looking at, if you do a half day, what's the positives and negatives with that? If you do 2 days, a day home and 2 days back, if the little kids come to school, but the older kids stayed home, I mean, we're looking at every option possible. But the things that are non-negotiable is whoever comes to work, we need a mask for. We need to be having hand sanitizers everywhere, and all that comes with costs. So that's immediate planning and something that's ongoing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anything else? All right. board member comments. Joe, do you have anything?
Yeah, just real quick, about the board meeting. Hopefully we can get a, a big venue, a bigger venue. Because I think we need to be very transparent with the public here, and hopefully they'll relax the capacity of being together, that for those people that are watching this right now, that they will tell their friends, and hopefully we can have them voice their opinions too. That's it.
Thanks, Joe. Pam?
Two things. One, I find it very ironic that we're all at the mercy of the most intelligent, educated people in the entire world to come together to create a vaccine so that we can all move forward. Yet our state, local, and federal government never seems to make education the top priority. On a positive note, our staff still continues to amaze me. Um, this we all know the school year didn't end the way anybody wanted it to end. Yet both high schools did a great job with graduations. Mentioned in the past the schools that did the parades for the kids, but most recently, White Oak Middle, and I'm sure other schools did it as well, but they honored their 3 teachers that are retiring. And of course, you can only imagine spending your whole life in education and your last couple months, you're not even in the classroom. Very bittersweet. But one of them is a very dear friend of mine, Debbie Jester, along with 2 other coworkers. And all of a sudden she went outside and here comes the Hamilton County Sheriff leading a parade of all the staff who were honoring them, Debbie and the other 2 for retiring. And I just thought that was, it was just so touching. And there's a lot of great things, and people are being very creative to make these moments special. So whoever came up with that idea, kudos to you, because I know you could just see it on her face how much it meant to her. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks, Pam. Matt, do you have anything?
I'm just hopeful that we can get the district headed in the right direction among all this trying times that we're dealing with. That's all.
Jim? Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, I just want to thank Susan and Jack, the principals at both high schools. They did a great job for graduation, and all of their assistant principals that helped out in that. That was a big project that they had to do, and I really think those seniors really appreciated it. And just hope we can get this taken care of and move on here as soon as possible. And I guess we'll see everybody on the 15th.
Yep. Thanks, Jim. I just want to say thank you for those that made the donations, Duke and Aruba and all those. We appreciate that very much. I just want to take a moment to thank our educators for kind of bobbing and weaving with the end of the year. We've said probably multiple times tonight, isn't the way we want to finish the school year. Quite a bit of uncertainty. Todd and I got a lot of emails when the survey went out, and it astonishes me how much people are, and I don't say this toward them at all, is they thought that our 2 options were school decisions and not legislative. And when we sat down and either returned or I had some phone calls, people started calling DeWine right away. Like I was very impressed. So I love to see the community come together like that. The last thing I want to say is congratulations to the graduates. I went up to Coleraine and watched a couple of the graduates walk across the stage, and it was neat to see the parents there, positive feedback. I'm glad we got to have some kind of outlet for them and honor them in a way. And just thank you for the parents who have, as a parent having a child in the district, I'm very fortunate my daughter's adapted well. Her teachers have been great as far as supporting her, but it comes with hardships, certainly. You know, loss of jobs, revenue, daycare. I can't imagine. But as a collectively, as a community, I hope we continue to pull together. I like some of the ideas that Todd spoke about as far as maybe we can have daycare and help out. I say all this with the intent, and I shared this with the folks that emailed me about the questionnaire. Thank you for your feedback. We need to know if there's an issue, or it may be an issue that we're not aware of. So please feel free to contact us with your fears and your concerns, and we'll do our best to support the community the best we can. And that's it for me. Thank you for joining us for our meeting this evening. For those that are out there in Facebook land and way across land. We will adjourn the meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Call for vote to adjourn the meeting. And all five of us agree on ending the meeting. Thank you very much. Have a great, safe summer.